She ran from her ruthless millionaire boss to protect her babies. His reaction stunned everyone. The elevator hummed its familiar tune as it climbed toward the 42nd floor, carrying Zoe Smith through the Manhattan skyline that sparkled like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Through the glass walls, the city pulsed with its relentless energy, but Zoe's mind was already organizing Roman Kane's schedule for the following week, anticipating calls that would need redirecting, meetings requiring precise timing. Most assistants lasted weeks. The lucky ones made it through a month before Roman Kane's demands broke them. They'd arrive bright-eyed and ambitious, armed with impressive degrees and sterling recommendations, only to discover that working for Manhattan's most ruthless CEO meant something entirely different than they'd imagined. But Zoe understood the unspoken rule from day one: maintain the boundaries, deliver excellence, and never assume familiarity meant friendship. For her, Roman Kane wasn't a challenge to conquer or a heart to win. He was simply the most demanding boss in Manhattan, and she was the only assistant good enough to keep pace. The executive floor was tomb quiet at 9 p.m., most of the staff long gone to their Friday night plans and families waiting at home. But Roman's corner office glowed with warm light, and Zoe could see his silhouette moving behind the frosted glass, broad shoulders tense with concentration, probably running his hands through dark hair the way he did when wrestling with particularly complex deals. She knocked twice and entered without waiting for permission, a privilege earned through 3 years of perfect timing and absolute discretion. "The Morrison contracts," she said, placing the leather portfolio on his desk with practiced efficiency. "Legal made the revisions you requested. The Singapore call is confirmed for 6 a.m. your time, and I've rescheduled your lunch with Davidson to next Tuesday." Roman looked up from his computer and something shifted in his expression. Usually, his gaze was sharp and calculating, assessing everything for strategic value, measuring people like chess pieces on his personal board. Tonight there was something else. A weariness she'd never seen before, mixed with something that looked almost like loneliness. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "You don't have to stay this late," he said finally, his voice lacking its usual commanding edge. "I could have handled the Morrison files tomorrow." Zoe tilted her head, studying him with the same analytical precision she applied to his schedule. In her 3 years at Kane Industries, Roman Kane had never once suggested she work less. His philosophy was simple: excellence demanded sacrifice and success required total dedication. The fact that he was sitting here at 9 p.m. was proof of his own commitment to that philosophy. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked, genuine concern creeping into her professional tone. A smile ghosted across his lips, the first genuine one she'd seen in weeks of board meetings and hostile negotiations. "When's the last time you had dinner?" "A real dinner, not coffee and whatever passes for food in the cafeteria." The question caught her completely off guard. She paused, actually trying to remember. Granola bars grabbed between meetings, takeout containers eaten while reviewing contracts, coffee that had become a food group. When was the last time she'd sat down for an actual meal? "Why?" "Because I just realized I've been working my best assistant into the ground, and that's poor resource management." He stood, moving around the desk with that predatory grace that made boardroom opponents nervous. "There's a place I know that does incredible Thai food." Every instinct screamed warning. This was exactly the kind of line blurring that had destroyed other assistants' careers at Kane Industries. The moment you forgot that Roman Kane was your boss first and everything else never, you became expendable. Replaceable. Another cautionary tale whispered in the break room. But something in his eyes stopped her from delivering the polite refusal that hovered on her lips. Beneath the armor of the ruthless CEO, she glimpsed something vulnerable, something almost human that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Mr. Kane?" she began, but her voice sounded uncertain even to her own ears. "Roman," he corrected quietly, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "Just for tonight, could you call me Roman?" The request hung between them like a bridge she could either cross or burn. Zoe felt her carefully constructed professional walls trembling, 3 years of perfect boundaries suddenly feeling as fragile as spun glass. And for the first time since she'd started working at Kane Industries, Zoe Smith made a decision based on what she wanted rather than what was smart. "Okay," she whispered, the single word changing everything. "Roman." His smile was devastating, not the sharp, calculating expression he wore in business meetings, but something warm and genuine that transformed his entire face. "Give me 5 minutes to grab my jacket." As Roman disappeared into his private office, Zoe stood frozen in the middle of the executive suite, her heart hammering against her ribs. The rational part of her mind was screaming that this was a mistake, that she was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But the woman beneath the professional facade, the woman who'd spent 3 years watching Roman Kane from behind the safety of her desk, who'd noticed the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he was genuinely amused, who'd seen the loneliness he thought he hid so well, that woman was already reaching for her purse. Welcome to Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives. I'm your host, and if you're new here, you've just walked into the most intense love story you'll hear all year. To my incredible subscribers, thank you for making this community amazing. Now, let's get back to the story. The tiny restaurant was a world away from the corporate towers that dominated their lives. Tucked between a vintage bookstore and a corner laundromat, the place barely held 20 tables, its walls decorated with faded photographs of Bangkok and strings of warm golden lights that cast everything in a soft, intimate glow. Table for two? The elderly hostess smiled warmly, completely oblivious to the fact that she was seating one of Manhattan's most feared CEOs next to a fish tank filled with lazy angelfish. Roman nodded, his usual commanding presence somehow softened in the cozy atmosphere. No one recognized him here. No nervous waiters hovering with excessive attention. No business rivals watching from nearby tables. No photographers trying to capture candid shots for the financial papers. For the first time in years, he was just another customer looking for good food and conversation. Zoe slid into the booth across from him, still adjusting to this surreal shift in their dynamic. The man sitting across from her bore little resemblance to the Roman Kane who decimated 3 competitors in hostile takeovers just this month. His tie was loosened, his expensive jacket draped over the back of his chair, and when he smiled at the waitress who brought their menus, there was genuine warmth in his expression. "The pad thai here is incredible," he said, scanning the laminated menu with the same intensity he usually reserved for merger agreements. "And the spring rolls are probably the best in Manhattan." "You come here often?" Zoe asked, surprised. She'd assumed a man like Roman Kane existed solely on 5-star restaurant experiences and exclusive private dining. "More than I probably should." He looked up from his menu, catching her curious expression. "Surprised? You thought I lived on champagne and caviar?" "Honestly? A little." She felt herself relaxing despite every professional instinct telling her to maintain some distance. "I just can't picture you here. It's so normal." Roman's laugh was rich and genuine. "I hate to break it to you, Zoe, but underneath all the corporate armor, I'm disappointingly normal. I put my pants on one leg at a time, I burn toast more often than I'd like to admit, and I have an embarrassing addiction to terrible action movies." "So tell me something I don't know about you," Roman said once they were alone again. 3 years of working together, and I realize I know nothing about Zoe Smith beyond her exceptional organizational skills and her ability to read my mind when it comes to scheduling." Zoe nearly choked on her tea. "There's not much to know. I'm probably the most boring person you'll ever have dinner with." "I doubt that." His dark eyes were focused on her with an intensity that made her skin warm. "Come on. What did you dream of being when you were little? Before you decided to become the most competent assistant in Manhattan?" "You'll laugh. Try me." She hesitated, twirling her chopsticks nervously. "I wanted to own a bookstore. Nothing fancy, just a little place where people could come and discover stories that would change their lives. I used to imagine arranging displays, hosting book clubs, maybe even having a reading corner for kids." Instead of laughing, Roman leaned forward, genuinely interested. "What stopped you?" "Reality mostly. My mother thought it was a waste of my MBA. She couldn't understand why I'd want to waste my potential on something so small." Zoe's voice carried an old hurt. "She kept pushing me toward corporate positions, bigger salaries, more prestigious titles. Success measured in square footage and stock options. And what do you think? I think there's something beautiful about small dreams. About touching individual lives instead of conquering markets." She looked up to find Roman watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Sorry, that probably sounds naive to someone who built an empire." "It sounds honest." His voice was soft. "You're not wasting anything, Zoe. You're learning. Watching. Building skills most people never develop. That's not wasting, that's strategic patience." The walk back to Kane Industries felt different, charged with something neither of them wanted to name. The Manhattan streets were alive with Friday night energy, but Zoe felt like she was moving through a dream, hyper-aware of Roman's presence beside her, of the way he automatically positioned himself between her and the street, of how their hands almost brushed with every step. In the elevator, their hands brushed reaching for the same button, and Zoe felt that spark of electricity again, stronger this time. When she looked up, Roman was watching her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. "Zoe." Her name on his lips was barely a whisper, rough with something that made her stomach flutter and her pulse race. She looked up slowly, knowing that whatever she saw in his eyes would change everything between them. Roman was watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. His usual calculating gaze had been replaced by something raw and honest, something that spoke of 3 years of careful professional distance finally cracking under the weight of what had been building between them. "We shouldn't," she whispered, but even as the words left her lips, she was turning toward him, drawn by a force stronger than logic or professional wisdom. "I know." His voice was husky, his free hand rising to trace the line of her cheek with fingers that trembled slightly. "But right now can't stop thinking about you. About this." The confession hung between them like a bridge she could either cross or burn. Every rational thought screamed that this was career suicide, that Roman Kane was her boss, that she was about to destroy 3 years of perfect professional boundaries for a moment of madness. "Roman. Tell me to stop," he said softly, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Tell me this is a mistake and I'll pretend this never happened. We'll go back to being boss and assistant, and I'll never cross this line again." She should have said stop. Should have reminded him about HR policies and professional conduct and all the reasons why this was impossible. Instead, she found herself moving closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I can't," she breathed. "I can't tell you to stop." Something shifted in his expression, relief mixed with something darker, more desperate. "Zoe, if we do this, there's no going back. Everything changes." "I know. Your job, our working relationship, everything we've built." "I know." She reached up, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck. "I know, and I don't care." The last word was swallowed by his mouth covering hers, soft at first, almost hesitant, as if he was giving her one last chance to change her mind. But when she kissed him back, rising on her toes to meet him more fully, something unleashed in both of them. Time seemed suspended in the small elevator compartment. There was no Kane Industries, no board meetings or hostile takeovers, no complicated family expectations or career considerations. There was just Roman's mouth moving against hers, his hands gentle but desperate, the way he whispered her name like a prayer between kisses. "God, Zoe," he breathed against her lips, his forehead resting against hers. "I've wanted this for so long." "How long?" she whispered back, surprised by her own boldness. "Since the first day you walked into my office and didn't flinch when I yelled at you about the Patterson contracts." His smile was soft, vulnerable. "You looked me straight in the eye and said, 'Mr. Kane, yelling won't make the contracts appear any faster, but I can have them revised and on your desk in 20 minutes. No one had ever spoken to me like that." "Like what?" "Like I was human instead of a force of nature." She laughed softly, her hands smoothing down the front of his shirt. "You are human. Devastatingly human." "Is that what I am?" His eyes crinkled with genuine amusement. "Devastating?" "Completely." She traced the line of his jaw with her fingertip. When Zoe finally left at midnight, Roman was still at his desk, but she felt his eyes following her to the elevator, feeling the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. She told herself that Monday would bring back their professional distance and everything would return to normal. Weeks after her night with her boss, Zoe could no longer ignore what her body had been trying to tell her. The persistent nausea that struck at random moments, the exhaustion that no amount of coffee could cure, and the uncomfortable realization that she couldn't remember her last period. It had been over 3 weeks since that night. Zoe knew she couldn't put off the inevitable any longer. Thank God for her emergency preparedness. The pregnancy test kit she kept in her desk drawer had been there for over a year. She'd grabbed it discreetly and headed to the marble executive bathroom, telling herself this was just to rule out the impossible. Standing in the pristine bathroom stall, Zoe stared at the small plastic stick with trembling hands. She hadn't really believed it would be pregnancy. This was supposed to put her mind at ease, to confirm that stress was making her body react strangely to the complicated situation with Roman. 2 bright pink lines appeared with devastating clarity. "Oh my God," she whispered, sinking onto the closed toilet seat. "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." Pregnant. She was actually pregnant with Roman Kane's baby. The shock was complete and overwhelming. In all her careful planning, one night of passion, and now everything was different. Her hands shook as she stared at the test, willing the lines to disappear, to be a mistake, to be anything other than what they clearly were. But the evidence was undeniable. For several long minutes, she just sat there in the executive bathroom, trying to process the magnitude of what this meant. Roman's baby. A child that would connect them forever, regardless of what happened between them professionally or personally. She forced herself to take deep breaths, to think logically. She could handle this. She was Zoe Smith, she'd managed crises before. She'd stay professional, keep working, give herself time to process this bombshell before making any major decisions. With hands that still trembled slightly, she wrapped the test in tissue and tucked it into her purse. She'd figure out what to say to Roman later. For now, she just needed to get through the rest of the workday without falling apart. She splashed cold water on her face, checked her reflection to make sure she looked composed, and returned to her desk with a forced calm that felt brittle as glass. The afternoon crawled by in a haze of normal tasks made surreal by the knowledge of what was growing inside her. Every time Roman called her into his office, every casual interaction, every shared glance carried new weight. He had no idea that their world had just fundamentally changed. She was organizing files in the outer office, her mind still reeling from the afternoon's discovery, when Roman's voice carried through the partially open door of his private conference room. He was on a call, his tone sharper than usual, the voice he used when dealing with particularly stubborn obstacles. "I don't care what it takes, Mitchell. The Hartwell Company has been bleeding market share for months, and now they're trying to undercut our Portland acquisition. I want them neutralized." Zoe's hands stilled on the filing cabinet. She'd learned to tune out Roman's business calls, confidentiality was part of her job, but something in his voice made her listen despite herself. Their family's been running that business for 3 generations? So what? Sentiment doesn't pay shareholders. The cold dismissal in his voice sent ice through her veins. Find their weak points. Family businesses always have them: personal guarantees, emotional decision-making, key family members who can be pressured. I don't care if the grandfather found it with his bare hands. Zoe backed away from the door, her chest tightening with something that felt like panic. I destroy anything that slows me down. The words hit her so hard. She pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from making a sound. Make it personal if you have to. Go after their son's college funding, the daughter's medical expenses, whatever it takes to force them to sell. I want Hartwell Company eliminated as competition within 6 months. The pregnancy test in her purse seemed to burn like a brand. Roman's voice continued, detailing financial warfare with the same dispassionate precision he used to discuss lunch meetings, but Zoe could barely hear over the roaring in her ears. This was who Roman Kane really was. Not the man who'd made love to her with such tenderness 3 weeks ago, but a destroyer who measured success by other people's pain. And she was carrying his child. I destroy anything that slows me down. The words echoed in her mind as she grabbed her purse and coat with hands that shook violently. A baby would definitely slow someone down. Change priorities. Demand compromises. Require sacrifices. She just heard exactly what Roman Kane did to things that slowed him down. The pregnancy test was still in her purse when she reached her apartment, those 2 pink lines that had shocked her just hours earlier. What had felt like a manageable crisis, complicated but potentially workable, now felt like a death sentence. She was carrying the child of a man who went after people's children to force business deals, who targeted medical expenses and family vulnerabilities without a flicker of conscience, who destroyed anything that got in his way. And nothing got in the way quite like an unplanned pregnancy. The decision crystallized with terrifying clarity. Roman Kane could never know about this baby, because if he found out, she had no doubt he'd find a way to control this situation too. Control her, control their child, reshape their lives to serve his strategic plans. She'd seen what happened to people who became inconvenient to Roman Kane. She wouldn't let that happen to her baby. The worst part was that he'd probably be subtle about it. No dramatic confrontations or obvious cruelty, just a gradual erosion of her autonomy, a systematic isolation from any support system that didn't serve his purposes. He'd convince her it was for her own good, for the baby's security, for their relationship's stability. Until one day she'd wake up and realize she'd become just another asset in Roman Kane's portfolio, managed and controlled and utterly dependent on his approval. That night, she made a decision that would change everything. Roman Kane could never know about this pregnancy. Because if he found out, she had no doubt he'd find a way to control this situation too. Control her, control their child, reshape their lives to fit his strategic plans. She'd seen what happened to people who became obstacles to Roman Kane's ambitions. She wouldn't let that happen to her baby. But as she sat in her dark apartment, her hand pressed to her stomach, Zoe realized she was about to become something far more dangerous than an obstacle. She was about to become a woman with everything to lose and nothing left to trust. And that made her more dangerous to Roman Kane than any business competitor ever could be. Because unlike the Hartwell family, she knew exactly how he operated. And she was going to disappear before he could destroy her too. Zoe called in sick Friday morning for the first time in 3 years. She spent the day methodically researching her escape route with the same precision she'd once applied to managing Roman's impossible schedule. Small towns where she could disappear. Places far from Manhattan's financial district, far from Roman's network of connections and private investigators. Cedar Falls, Oregon. Population, 3,247. One main street, one bookstore, one weekly newspaper that probably hadn't covered a hostile takeover in its entire existence. The kind of place where Roman Kane's influence couldn't reach, where a woman could reinvent herself without questions. The train pulled away from Penn Station at 6:47 a.m., carrying Zoe toward a future she'd never imagined and away from a life that had become impossible to live. Through the window, Manhattan's skyline blurred past, steel and glass monuments to ambition that looked different now, less like possibilities and more like prisons. Her phone buzzed once with a text from Roman, "Looking forward to seeing you today. We need to talk about the Morrison account." She turned the phone off and dropped it into the trash bin beside her seat. Zoe Smith was officially unreachable. The weeks blurred together in a haze of dead ends and false leads. Roman threw himself into work with an intensity that worried even his most ambitious executives. He dismantled 2 competitors before lunch, acquired 3 companies before dinner, and still spent his evenings staring at security footage from train stations and airports, looking for a glimpse of familiar dark hair. By the end of the second month, even Roman's most loyal employees were walking on eggshells. He'd fired 3 assistants for failing to anticipate his needs the way Zoe had. He'd canceled social obligations, ignored board meetings, and spent his nights in the office staring at empty files and wondering what he'd done wrong. The third month brought a breakthrough that shattered what remained of his composure. "We found something," Marcus Webb said, bursting into Roman's office with an expression that mixed triumph with something like pity. Bank records show a large cash withdrawal 3 days before she disappeared. The timing matches a train ticket purchase, cash payment, to Portland, Oregon. Portland. Roman's heart hammered against his ribs. "How sure are you?" 90%. Station security footage shows a woman matching her description boarding the 6:47 a.m. train to Portland on the day she resigned. Roman was already reaching for his jacket. "Book me the next flight." "Sir, that was 3 months ago. Even if she went to Portland, she could be anywhere by now." And Marcus hesitated. "There's something else." The cash withdrawal was large enough for relocation expenses, new identification, a complete fresh start. This level of planning suggests she really doesn't want to be found. "I don't care what it suggests." Roman's voice carried that deadly quiet that made grown men nervous. "I'm going to Portland and I'm going to find her. Whatever she's running from, whatever she thinks I've done, I need to know the reason for her sudden disappearance." Marcus Webb had seen obsession before, but this was something different. This was a man watching his entire world collapse around the absence of one woman, and it was honestly terrifying to witness. "What do you want me to tell the board about your extended absence?" "Tell them I'm handling a priority acquisition." Roman's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Because that's exactly what this is." 3 hours later, Roman Kane was on a private jet to Portland, armed with photographs, credit card records, and a determination that bordered on madness. He'd built an empire through sheer force of will, and he'd find Zoe Smith the same way. What he couldn't understand was why finding her felt so much more important than everything he'd built. Why the thought of never seeing her again made him want to burn down the entire corporate kingdom he'd spent his life creating. But as the plane carried him toward the Pacific Northwest, one question haunted him more than all the others. If he found her, would she be happy to see him? Or would she run again, this time to a place even his resources couldn't reach? The apartment above Morrison's bakery smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread every morning, a far cry from the sterile corporate atmosphere that had defined Zoe's life for 3 years. She'd wake to the sound of Margaret mixing dough in the kitchen below, to sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked Main Street instead of Manhattan's Steel Canyon, to a life that moved at the pace of seasons rather than stock markets. 6 months had passed since Zoe Smith had ceased to exist, and Zoe Miller was finally beginning to feel real. "How are you settling in, dear?" Margaret asked during Zoe's first week at Riverside Books, her warm eyes taking in the way Zoe unconsciously cradled her still small bump. "Cedar Falls can be quite an adjustment for someone from the big city." "It's perfect," Zoe had replied and meant it. "Exactly what I needed." The lie about her difficult divorce had been easier to maintain than she'd expected. Small towns, Zoe discovered, were full of people who understood the need for fresh starts without prying into the details. Her story of taking back her maiden name, of needing quiet to heal, resonated with the customers who became regulars at the bookstore. By her 4th month in Cedar Falls, Zoe had fallen into rhythms that felt surprisingly natural. Morning shifts at the bookstore, afternoon walks along the river that gave the town its name, evenings reading in her apartment while her babies kicked and shifted inside her growing belly. Because it was babies, plural. Dr. Sarah Whitman, Cedar Falls' only obstetrician, had delivered the news with the kind of gentle excitement that made Zoe simultaneously thrilled and terrified. Twins, Dr. Whitman had said, pointing to the ultrasound screen where 2 tiny forms nestled together like secrets. Looks like they're due in early February. Zoe had stared at the screen, watching the rapid flutter of 2 heartbeats, and felt her world expand in ways she hadn't expected. These weren't just Roman's children anymore. They were hers, completely and absolutely, 2 little lives she would protect with everything she had. "Are you okay?" Dr. Whitman had asked, noticing Zoe's tears. "I know twins can be overwhelming to think about, especially for a single mother." "I'm fine," Zoe had whispered, clutching the ultrasound photos. "They're perfect." And they were. Even when morning sickness made her queasy during the busy Saturday rushes at the bookstore, even when her back ached from standing too long, even when she lay awake at night wondering how she'd manage 2 babies on a bookstore assistant's salary, they were perfect. Margaret had caught her reading a financial article about Roman's hostile takeover of some tech company, her expression unreadable. "Old habits?" Margaret had asked gently. "Something like that," Zoe had replied, quickly closing the browser. "My ex worked in corporate finance. I guess I still find it interesting." Another lie, but a necessary one. Because the truth, that she was desperately hungry for any news about the man whose children she carried, the man she'd left and still dreamed about, was too dangerous to admit even to herself. 7 months into her pregnancy, Zoe had achieved something she'd never expected: peace. Real, genuine contentment that didn't depend on anticipating someone else's needs or managing someone else's empire. She knew her regular customers' reading preferences, could predict which books would sell well, had even started a children's reading hour on Saturday mornings that drew families from 3 towns over. "You're glowing," Mrs. Patterson from the apartment below often said when they passed on the stairs. "Pregnancy suits you, dear." "Thank you," Zoe would reply, one hand resting on her considerable bump where the twins seemed to be practicing acrobatics. "I feel good." And she did, mostly. The nightmares had stopped. The ones where Roman discovered her secret and took the babies away, or where she woke up back in Manhattan to find Cedar Falls, had been a dream. The constant anxiety about being found had faded into background awareness, like the distant sound of traffic you eventually stop noticing. She'd done it. She'd successfully disappeared from Roman Kane's world and built something new, something that belonged entirely to her. The bookstore had become her sanctuary in ways she hadn't expected. The smell of paper and binding glue, the quiet conversations with customers seeking their next literary escape, the satisfaction of matching the right book with the right reader, it all felt purposeful in ways her corporate job never had. That Tuesday started like any other. Zoe arrived at the bookstore at noon for her afternoon shift, her 7-month belly making simple tasks more challenging but not impossible. The twins had been active all morning, and she'd taken to talking to them while she worked. "Your mom's going to be a co-manager soon," she murmured while rearranging the fiction section. "What do you think about that? We'll have our own little empire here, just the 3 of us." The front door chimed, and Zoe called out her usual greeting without looking up. "Welcome to Riverside Books. Let me know if you need help finding anything." Silence. Something made her glance toward the entrance and her world stopped. Roman Kane stood just inside the door, scanning the small space with those sharp dark eyes that missed nothing. He wore jeans and a black jacket instead of his usual $1,000 suits, but there was no mistaking the controlled power in his stance, the predatory stillness that had made him legendary in business circles. For a moment, Zoe thought she might be hallucinating. 7 months of pregnancy hormones and suppressed longing finally creating the vision she'd forbidden herself to want. But when their eyes met across the bookstore, when she saw his expression change from searching to recognition to something harder and more complex, she knew this was devastatingly real. Roman's gaze moved immediately to her rounded belly, and she watched his face transform. Surprise giving way to understanding, understanding giving way to something that looked like fury and heartbreak combined. "Hello, Zoe." His voice was exactly as she remembered, low and controlled, but she caught the underlying tension that suggested he was holding himself together through sheer force of will. "How did you find me?" The question came out as barely a whisper. You're not as invisible as you think. He moved deeper into the store, his presence making the cozy space feel suddenly cramped and airless. It took time, but I have resources. Of course he did. Roman Kane had the kind of resources that could track anyone, anywhere, if he was determined enough. And if there was one thing Zoe knew about Roman Kane, it was that he never gave up on something he wanted. What do you want? Instead of answering, he gestured toward her stomach with a movement that was carefully controlled but somehow devastating in its restraint. When? The simple question carried the weight of 7 months of searching, of sleepless nights and private investigators and a desperation she could see in the tight lines around his eyes. Roman, When? He repeated, and she heard the steel beneath the quiet question that had made boardroom opponents tremble. 2 months, she whispered. He was quiet for a long moment, calculating with that terrifying precision she remembered so well. You left because you're pregnant. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. With my child. Another nod. Were you ever going to tell me? The pain in his voice surprised her. She'd expected anger, demands, the ruthless calculation she'd overheard in that phone call. Not this wounded bewilderment that made her chest ache with guilt and longing in equal measure. No, she said honestly. Why? How could she explain without sounding paranoid? How could she tell him that his own words had terrified her, that she'd heard him planning to destroy a family and realized what he might do to anything that slowed him down? You wouldn't understand. Try me. Zoe looked around the bookstore, her sanctuary, her new life, the peaceful world she'd built for herself and her children. Through the window, she could see Mrs. Henderson walking her ancient corgi, could hear the distant sound of children playing in the park across the street. In 2 minutes, Roman Kane had shattered the illusion of safety she'd spent 7 months building. Not here, she said finally. Then where? There's a coffee shop 2 blocks down. Miller's Cafe. She grabbed her purse with hands that shook visibly. Give me 5 minutes to close up. As she turned the sign to closed, and locked the door, Zoe felt like she was sealing the fate of the life she'd fought so hard to create. When they stepped onto the sidewalk together, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows between them, she realized she was walking toward either salvation or destruction. The only question was which. The walk to Miller's Cafe felt like a death march. Every step carried Zoe further from the safety of her carefully constructed life and closer to a confrontation she'd spent 7 months trying to avoid. Roman walked beside her in silence, his presence radiating a barely contained intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness and fear in equal measure. She could feel the weight of his gaze as he took in the changes, not just her obvious pregnancy, but the way she moved differently now, more slowly, one hand instinctively protective over her belly. The way she nodded to Mrs. Henderson as they passed, exchanged waves with the teenagers from her Saturday reading group, belonged to this place in ways she'd never belonged anywhere in Manhattan. You look. Roman started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair in the gesture she remembered so well. You look settled here. There was something almost wistful in his observation, as if he was seeing a version of her he'd never imagined could exist. I am, she said quietly, and it wasn't a lie. Until 5 minutes ago she had been. Miller's Cafe was nearly empty at 4 in the afternoon, just a few locals nursing coffee and reading newspapers, blissfully unaware that their peaceful Tuesday was about to become ground zero for a conversation that would determine the fate of 2 unborn children. Zoe chose a corner table where they couldn't be overheard, her hands wrapped around a mug of herbal tea while Roman sat across from her with black coffee he hadn't touched. The familiar ritual felt like an echo of their dinner at the Thai restaurant. 2 people sharing a table, sharing space, but separated by an ocean of unspoken truths. You look good, Roman said finally, his voice carefully controlled. Pregnancy suits you. Don't? The word came out sharper than she'd intended. Why not? It's true. Because it doesn't change anything. She forced herself to meet his eyes, to see the pain and confusion there without letting it weaken her resolve. I heard you, Roman. That night on the phone with your lawyer. You said you'd destroy anything that slows you down. His face went completely still. The Hartwell acquisition. A family business. 3 generations, you said. And you were planning to destroy them just because they were competing with you. The words tumbled out in a rush, 7 months of suppressed fear and anger finally finding voice. Go after their son's college funding, their daughter's medical expenses, whatever it takes to force them to sell. That's what I do, Zoe. That's business. And I'm pregnant with your baby. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Babies, actually. Twins. A pregnancy definitely slows people down. Changes priorities. Makes them vulnerable. So I left before you could destroy me too. Roman stared at her for a long moment, and she watched something shift in his expression. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of how his words must have sounded to a woman carrying his children. Twins, he repeated, the word barely audible. You're having twins. 2 months from now, yes. And you think I would have hurt you? Hurt them. I think you would have controlled me. Managed me like a business problem. Her voice broke slightly on the admission. I couldn't let that happen to my children. Our children, he corrected, and there was steel in his voice now, the commanding tone that had built an empire. These babies are mine too, Zoe. You had no right to make that decision alone. I had every right. Did you? He leaned forward, intensity radiating from every line of his body. Did you have the right to disappear without a word? To let me think you just decided I wasn't worth the complications? To keep me from knowing my own children exist? The pain in his voice made her flinch, but she pressed on. You said. I know what I said. Roman's control finally cracked, 7 months of suppressed anguish spilling over. I looked for you, Zoe. For months. I had investigators, private security, every resource I could think of trying to find you. Not because I wanted to control you, but because I thought. He ran a hand through his hair, and for a moment she saw the abandoned boy he'd once been. People leave, Zoe. In my experience, they always leave. But I thought maybe you were different. I thought maybe what we had was strong enough to weather whatever scared you away. That's not. I blamed myself, he continued, his voice raw with old pain. For weeks I wondered what I'd done wrong. What I could have said differently. Whether you were safe, whether you needed help, whether someone had hurt you. His dark eyes fixed on hers, stripped of all armor. I've been left before, Zoe. More times than I can count. Foster families who decided I was too much trouble. Business partners who disappeared when things got difficult. But losing you? His voice cracked slightly. That was different. That actually broke something in me. Guilt twisted in Zoe's chest as she saw the devastation she'd unknowingly inflicted. She'd been so focused on protecting herself and the babies that she hadn't considered how her disappearance might affect the man who'd learned early in life that people he cared about vanished without explanation. You said you'd destroy anything that slows you down, she whispered. I was talking about business rivals, Zoe. Companies that threaten my market share. His voice was gentler now, but no less intense. Not you. Never you. How was I supposed to know that? You could have asked me. Could I? Really? She leaned back in her chair, one hand resting protectively on her belly where one of the twins was kicking restlessly. You're Roman Kane. You don't do relationships. You don't do complications. Your entire reputation is built on being ruthless and single-minded. My reputation is not the same as my reality. Isn't it? For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, Cedar Falls continued its sleepy afternoon routine, a world away from the intense high-stakes environment they'd left behind in New York. Roman's eyes never left her face, studying her with the same intensity he'd once reserved for hostile negotiations. What's it like? He asked quietly. Being pregnant. Carrying them. The unexpected gentleness in his question caught her off guard. It's. She searched for words to describe the experience of growing 2 lives inside her body, of feeling completely responsible for their well-being while simultaneously terrified of every decision she made. It's everything. Overwhelming and magical and terrifying all at once. Do they move around a lot? Despite everything, a smile tugged at her lips. Constantly. They seem to have very strong opinions about when I should be sleeping. Can you feel them now? Something in his voice, wonder mixed with longing, made her heart ache. Yes. Baby A is practicing soccer kicks against my ribs, and Baby B is doing what feels like interpretive dance. Roman's expression was soft, almost reverent. Baby A and Baby B? That's what Dr. Whitman calls them. She says they're too active for the ultrasound to get clear gender readings, but they're both healthy and growing well. Dr. Whitman? The local obstetrician. She's wonderful, very gentle, very thorough. Nothing like the corporate medicine I was used to in Manhattan. You've been taking care of yourself. Both of you. All 3 of you. I've been trying to. Roman was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between her face and her belly with an expression she couldn't quite read. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. What do you want from me, Zoe? The question surprised her. What do you mean? I mean, now that I've found you, now that I know about the babies, what happens next? Do you want me to leave? Pretend I never found you? Send child support checks and stay out of your life? She hadn't thought beyond hiding, beyond keeping the secret. Now, faced with Roman's actual presence and the reality of two children who were as much his as hers, she felt overwhelmed by possibilities she'd refused to consider. Because I need you to understand something. Roman leaned forward, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper that had once terrified her. I'm not going anywhere, Zoe. Not this time. I don't care if you're afraid of me, if you think I'll try to control you, if you'd rather raise our children without me. I will not be kept from my own family. The certainty in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. Not fear exactly, but recognition of the man who'd built an empire through sheer force of will. When Roman Kane decided he wanted something, he usually got it. And if I say no, she asked quietly, then we'll figure out another way. His smile was sharp-edged but not unkind. I'm very good at solving problems, Zoe. I've had 7 months to think about this, to plan for every contingency. I'm not the same man you left in Manhattan. What's that supposed to mean? It means losing you changed me. It means I've spent 7 months learning what really matters. It means I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm not the monster you think I am. Something in his tone made her study his face more carefully. There were lines there that hadn't existed 7 months ago, a weariness that spoke of sleepless nights and endless searching. This wasn't the invincible CEO she'd fled from. This was a man who'd been broken by loss and was trying to rebuild himself into something worthy of love. I need time, she said finally. How much time? I don't know. Roman nodded slowly, then pulled out his phone and made a call. Cancel my meetings for the rest of the week, he told whoever answered. And book me a room at the best hotel in this town. Roman, what are you doing? He ended the call and looked at her with an expression that was equal parts determination and vulnerability. Staying until we figure this out. You can't just. I can. His smile was gentler now, but no less resolute. I'm Roman Kane, remember? I do whatever I want. And what I want is to be part of this. Part of your life. Part of our children's lives. As he walked her back to her apartment, Zoe tried to ignore the way his presence changed everything. The way other people noticed him, the way he seemed to fill whatever space he occupied, the way her heart raced just from being near him again. At her door he paused. For what it's worth, I would never hurt you or our children. I know you don't believe that yet, but I'll prove it to you. How? By staying. By being here, not because I want to control you, but because I want to be part of your life. Both of your lives. He gestured toward her belly with infinite gentleness. All of your lives. He left her standing in her doorway, watching him disappear into the gathering dusk, and Zoe realized her carefully constructed new life was about to become very complicated indeed. But as she closed the door and felt the twins moving restlessly inside her, she had to admit that a small, traitorous part of her heart was glad he'd found her. The question was, what did Roman Kane plan to do now that he had? The silence that followed Roman's declaration stretched between them like a chasm, filled with 7 months of suppressed pain and misunderstanding. Zoe watched him struggle with words, this man who commanded boardrooms and dismantled competitors with surgical precision, reduced to stumbling over his own emotions. You want to know what those 7 months were like for me? Roman's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of sleepless nights and desperate searching. I'll tell you. He leaned back in his chair, his coffee growing cold as he stared at something beyond her shoulder, beyond the cozy cafe, beyond Cedar Falls itself. For weeks I convinced myself you'd come back. That whatever had scared you would resolve itself, and you'd walk into my office Monday morning with that perfect smile and some reasonable explanation for disappearing. Roman. I'm sorry I didn't. Didn't what? Didn't think I'd care? His voice cracked slightly. Didn't think losing you would matter to a man like me? I thought you'd move on. Find another assistant, forget about what happened between us. Roman stared at her for a long moment, something like disbelief flickering across his features. Forget about you? Zoe, what we had that night, what we shared over dinner, that wasn't some casual office romance for me. That was... He struggled for words. That was the first time in my adult life I'd felt anything real. The confession hit her. But you never said. I never said a lot of things. Roman ran both hands through his hair, the gesture making him look younger, more vulnerable. I never told you that I'd been watching you for months before that dinner, trying to work up the courage to ask you out properly. Never told you that I'd spent 3 years falling in love with your competence, your kindness, the way you treated everyone in the office with respect regardless of their position. Zoe felt tears starting to gather in her eyes. Roman. I never told you that the night we kissed, I went home and called my lawyer about changing Kane Industries' employee relationship policies. That I was ready to restructure my entire professional life just to be with you without complications. You were going to change company policy? I was going to change everything. His smile was sad, self-deprecating. For the first time in my life, I'd found something more important than business strategy. Someone who made me want to be better than the ruthless bastard everyone thinks I am. But the Hartwell Company was a business decision that had nothing to do with us. Roman leaned forward, urgency replacing the exhaustion in his voice. Zoe, you have to understand, what you overheard was Roman Kane, the CEO, protecting his shareholders' interests. That wasn't the man who kissed you, who shared his childhood trauma over pad thai, who was planning to turn his entire world upside down for love. How was I supposed to know the difference? You weren't. That's my fault. He reached across the table, his fingers hovering just above hers without quite making contact. I spent so many years building walls between my personal life and my professional persona that I forgot they were supposed to protect me, not the people I cared about. Roman, I'm so sorry. I wasn't angry, Zoe. That's what you need to understand. I wasn't plotting revenge or trying to hunt you down to punish you. I was grieving. His voice broke slightly on the last word. I was mourning the loss of the only person who'd ever made me feel like I might be worth loving. The tears she'd been fighting finally spilled over. You are worth loving. You were always worth loving. One of the twins kicked hard against her ribs, as if responding to the emotional intensity of the conversation. Zoe's hand moved instinctively to the spot, and Roman's eyes followed the movement with an expression of such longing it made her chest ache. Can I? He started to reach toward her belly, then stopped himself. Would it be okay if I? You want to feel them? More than anything. Zoe hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Baby A is the active one. Right here. She guided his hand to the spot where their child was currently performing what felt like Olympic gymnastics. The moment Roman's palm pressed against her belly, his entire face transformed. Wonder replaced pain, awe replaced anguish as he felt his child moving beneath his touch. Oh my God, he breathed. That's really them. That's really our baby. Babies. There are 2 in there. 2. He said it like a prayer, like a miracle he hadn't dared hope for. We're having twins. Are you okay with that? 2 babies is a lot of responsibility, a lot of complications. Zoe. Roman's voice was firm, his hand still pressed against her belly where their children grew. Look at me. She met his eyes, dark and intense and completely focused on her. I spent 7 months thinking I'd lost you forever. 7 months believing I'd never see you again, never get the chance to tell you how I really felt, never have the family I didn't even know I wanted until you disappeared. His thumb traced a gentle circle on her belly. Finding out you're carrying my children, our children, isn't a complication. It's a miracle. Even though babies definitely slow people down, the reference to his own words made him wince. Especially because they slow people down. Zoe, I've spent my entire adult life running at breakneck speed, building empires and destroying competitors and never once stopping to ask what it was all for. What's the point of having everything if you have no one to share it with? I want a chance, he said finally. A chance to prove that the man you fell for is real, not just some mask I wear when it's convenient. A chance to show you that I can be the partner you need and the father our children deserve. And if I can't give you that chance? If the trust is too broken? Then I'll keep trying anyway. His voice carried that quiet determination that had built his empire. Because you're carrying my children, Zoe. They're going to need both their parents, whether we're together or not. And I refuse to be the kind of father who only sees his kids on weekends. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying in Cedar Falls until you feel safe enough to trust me again. I'm going to prove day by day that I'm not the monster you think I am. For how long? Roman's smile was gentle but implacable. However long it takes. Outside, the afternoon was fading into evening, casting long shadows through the cafe windows. Other customers had come and gone, but Zoe and Roman remained at their corner table, hands connected through her belly where their children grew, finally beginning to bridge the chasm that 7 months of fear and misunderstanding had created. I missed you, Zoe admitted quietly. Every single day I miss you. Then why didn't you come back? Because missing you wasn't enough to overcome being terrified of you. Roman nodded, acceptance and pain warring in his expression. And now I don't know what I feel. She looked down at their joined hands, his palm warm against her belly where their twins continued their restless dance. but I'm willing to find out. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't trust, wasn't love renewed. But it was a beginning. And for a man who'd spent 7 months believing he'd lost everything that mattered, it was enough. For now. Roman Cain had conquered hostile boardrooms, dismantled billion-dollar competitors, and built an empire through sheer force of will. But nothing in his extensive corporate experience had prepared him for the challenge of convincing Mrs. Patterson at Cedar Falls Realty that he needed an apartment immediately. "Well, honey, we don't get many requests for furnished rentals in the middle of the week," the elderly woman said, peering at him over her reading glasses with the kind of maternal scrutiny that made grown men squirm. "Most folks around here plan these things months in advance." "I understand it's unusual," Roman replied, deploying the patient charm that had closed $1,000 deals. "But I'm prepared to pay whatever premium is necessary for immediate occupancy." "Premium?" Mrs. Patterson looked genuinely confused. "Honey, this isn't Manhattan. We don't gouge people just because they're in a hurry." Roman blinked. In his world, everything had a price and urgency always commanded a surcharge. The concept of small-town fairness was as foreign to him as speaking Mandarin. "However," Mrs. Patterson continued, pulling out a thick binder, "I do have a lovely one-bedroom above the hardware store. Furnished, utilities included, walking distance to everywhere you'd need to go in Cedar Falls." "That sounds perfect. Might I ask what brings you to our little town?" "Most visitors are just passing through on their way to Portland." Roman hesitated. He could hardly explain that he was stalking his pregnant ex-assistant who'd fled from him 7 months ago. Reconnecting with an old friend. Someone very important to me." Mrs. Patterson's knowing smile suggested she saw right through his careful phrasing. "The Miller girl at the bookstore. You know Zoe?" "Honey, this is a town of 3,000 people. I know everyone's shoe size and coffee order." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Sweet girl, that one. Been through some troubles, but she's got good instincts. Margaret Chin thinks the world of her." Roman felt an unexpected surge of pride. Of course Zoe had impressed everyone she'd met. She had that rare combination of competence and genuine kindness that made people want to be around her. "She's special," he said quietly. "Special enough to bring you all the way from whatever big city spit you out?" "More than special enough." Mrs. Patterson studied him for a moment, her eyes sharp despite her grandmotherly appearance. "You hurt her, son, and you'll have to answer to more than just her. This town looks after its own." The warning was delivered with a sweet smile, but Roman caught the steel beneath it. "I understand. And for what it's worth, the last thing I want is to hurt her." "Good. Then you can have the apartment. First month's rent is $800, deposit is the same." Roman nearly choked. His Manhattan penthouse cost more per day than this apartment cost per month. "That's very reasonable. Like I said, honey, we don't gouge people here." 2 hours later, Roman found himself standing in a studio apartment that could have fit in his walk-in closet, trying to figure out how to operate a coffee maker that was older than some of his employees. The contrast to his usual accommodations was jarring: mismatched furniture, a kitchenette barely large enough for one person, windows that looked out onto Main Street instead of Manhattan's glittering skyline. But it was 3 blocks from Zoe's apartment and 2 blocks from the bookstore where she worked. It was close enough to prove he was serious about staying, far enough to give her space to breathe. His phone buzzed with the 5th urgent call from his board of directors. Roman stared at the screen, then deliberately sent it to voicemail. For the first time in his professional life, Cain Industries would have to function without his constant oversight. The next morning, Roman woke to the sound of actual roosters crowing and the smell of fresh bread from the bakery below Zoe's apartment. After a shower that required him to duck to avoid hitting his head on the low ceiling, he dressed in jeans and a simple button-down, the most casual clothes he owned, and walked to the only coffee shop in town. Miller's Cafe was already bustling with the morning crowd. Roman ordered black coffee and a muffin, then sat at the same corner table where he and Zoe had talked the day before. He wasn't hiding, wasn't lurking, just establishing a routine that happened to intersect with the places she might be. "You're the fellow who rented Patterson's apartment," said a voice behind him. Roman turned to find a man in his 60s with paint-stained fingers and kind eyes. Word travels fast. In a town this size, news travels faster than gossip. "I'm Bill Chen, Margaret's husband. I own the hardware store you're living above. Roman Cain." He stood to shake Bill's hand, noting the firm grip and steady gaze of a man who'd earned his living with his hands. "Heard you're here about our Zoe. Is that what people are saying?" "People are saying a lot of things. That you're a businessman from back east. That you knew Zoe before she came here. That you're either the best thing that could happen to her or the worst." Bill's smile was friendly but assessing. Which one are you? I'm hoping to be the first, terrified I might be the second. The honest answer seemed to surprise Bill. Fair enough. Mind if I sit? I've got a few minutes before the store opens. Roman gestured to the empty chair, unsure what this conversation would entail but willing to submit to whatever small-town vetting process awaited him. Margaret says Zoe's been happier here than she's been since she arrived. Says she's got real talent for matching books with people, real instincts for what folks need. That doesn't surprise me. She's always been good at anticipating what people need before they know it themselves. And what do you need, Roman Kane? The question was deceptively simple, but Roman sensed it carried weight beyond small talk. I need to prove I'm not the man she thinks I am. I need to show her that I can be the partner she deserves and the father our children need. Bill's eyebrows rose slightly. Children? Plural? Roman realized his slip immediately. Yes. She's having twins. Well, I'll be damned. Bill's grin was wide and genuine. Twins run in families, you know. My grandfather was a twin, had twin boys himself. Are you related to Zoe? Not by blood, but this town makes a family out of whoever needs one. Zoe needed one when she got here, and we were happy to provide it. Bill's expression grew more serious. The question is, what kind of family are you planning to be? The kind that stays. The kind that shows up. The kind that puts Zoe and those babies first no matter what. Even if it means giving up that big city empire you built? Roman didn't hesitate. Especially then. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, Bill apparently weighing Roman's words against some internal metric. Tell you what, Bill said finally. I could use some help around the hardware store. Nothing fancy, just moving inventory, helping customers find what they need. Pays $15 an hour, which probably doesn't sound like much to a man like you. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to prove you can work with your hands instead of just your head. To show this town, and Zoe, that you're willing to start over from the bottom if that's what it takes. Roman stared at him. $15 an hour was less than he spent on lunch most days. But it was also something he'd never had in his privileged corporate existence. Honest work, fairly paid, with no ulterior motives or strategic implications. When do I start? Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. sharp. Wear clothes you don't mind getting dirty. As Bill left for his store, Roman sat alone with his coffee and contemplated the radical turn his life had taken. 24 hours ago, he'd been the CEO of a billion-dollar corporation. Now he was an hourly employee at a small-town hardware store, living in a studio apartment, pursuing a woman who had every reason not to trust him. And for the first time in years, he felt like he might be exactly where he belonged. His phone buzzed again, Mitchell calling about the merger documents that needed his immediate attention. Roman looked at the screen, then at the quiet street outside where Zoe would walk to work in a few hours, where his children would grow up if he could convince their mother to let him stay. He turned the phone off and slipped it into his pocket. Kane Industries would have to wait. That afternoon, Roman was unpacking the single suitcase he'd brought from New York when he heard familiar voices from the street below. Through his window, he could see Zoe walking slowly toward her apartment, one hand on her lower back, the other protecting her belly. Margaret Chin walked beside her, their conversation animated and clearly enjoyable. Told him the reading hour was your idea, and now he wants to donate a whole set of children's classics, Margaret was saying. That's wonderful. The kids have been asking for more variety. You're good with them. Natural teacher instincts. Roman watched Zoe's face light up with genuine pleasure at the compliment, and something twisted in his chest. This was the woman he'd fallen for, not just competent and beautiful but genuinely caring, someone who found joy in small kindnesses and community connections. As if sensing his attention, Zoe looked up toward his window. Their eyes met for a moment, and Roman saw surprise flicker across her features before she quickly looked away and hurried into her building. But she hadn't looked afraid. Hadn't looked angry. She'd looked curious. It was a start. That evening, Roman walked to the small grocery store and bought ingredients for dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and sauce and the kind of simple salad he hadn't made for himself in years. He cooked in his tiny kitchen, ate at his small table, and tried to remember the last time he'd prepared his own meal. Through his window, he could see lights in Zoe's apartment across the street. Could imagine her moving carefully around her own small space, probably talking to the babies the way he'd seen pregnant women do in movies. The thought of missing those months of her pregnancy, of not being there as his children grew inside her, made his chest ache with regret. But he was here now. And tomorrow he'd start proving that Roman Kane could be more than a corporate predator in an expensive suit. Tomorrow he'd start becoming the man Zoe and their children needed him to be. His phone buzzed one last time, a text from his assistant back in New York. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow. Your presence required. Roman typed back quickly, handle it. I'm unavailable for the foreseeable future. Then he turned the phone off completely and put it in a drawer. Some things were more important than emergency board meetings. Some battles were worth changing your entire life to fight. And some women were worth becoming a completely different man to deserve. Roman Kane was about to find out if he was capable of that kind of transformation. Starting tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. sharp, wearing clothes he didn't mind getting dirty, earning $15 an hour and every ounce of trust he'd lost 7 months ago. The redemption of Roman Kane was officially underway. Hit that like button if you can feel the change happening. This isn't just a man chasing a woman anymore. This is someone completely reinventing himself for love. But can a leopard really change his spots? And will Zoe believe it when she sees it? What happens next will surprise everyone who thinks they know Roman Kane. Roman's alarm went off at 6:30 a.m., and for a moment he forgot where he was. No floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, no Egyptian cotton sheets, no view of his empire stretching toward the horizon. Just a small bedroom with morning light filtering through simple curtains, and the sound of Bill Chin opening the hardware store downstairs. He dressed in jeans that felt foreign against his skin. When was the last time he'd worn anything that wasn't custom-tailored? And walked downstairs to find Bill arranging displays of gardening tools. Right on time, Bill said approvingly. Hope you brought an appetite for learning, because today we're reorganizing the entire plumbing section. Roman had never touched a pipe wrench in his life, but he said, lead the way. The first hour was humbling in ways Roman hadn't anticipated. He could negotiate multi-billion-dollar mergers, but he couldn't identify the difference between a coupling and a union. He could read complex financial statements, but the organization system for different grades of PVC pipe might as well have been hieroglyphics. Don't worry, Bill said kindly, watching Roman struggle with the difference between 3/4 inch and 1/2 inch fittings. Everyone's got to start somewhere. My nephew thought a pipe cutter was for cutting cheese his first week. I feel like I'm learning a completely different language. You are. The language of fixing things instead of buying new ones. Of building something that lasts instead of something that looks impressive. By noon, Roman's back ached from lifting boxes, his hands were dirty despite the work gloves, and he'd helped 3 customers find exactly what they needed for their home repair projects. When Mrs. Rodriguez thanked him for taking the time to explain how to install a new faucet, something warm settled in his chest that had nothing to do with profit margins or strategic advantages. You're a natural at this, Bill observed during their lunch break. Got the patience for explaining things and you actually listen when people tell you their problems. It's not that different from my old job, really. People come in with problems, you help them find solutions. Except here the solutions cost $12 instead of $12 million. And they actually fix the problem instead of creating new ones, Roman added, surprising himself with the admission. Bill studied him over his sandwich. Having second thoughts about the corporate life? Having first thoughts about what really matters. That afternoon brought a rush of customers preparing for the weekend, and Roman found himself genuinely enjoying the work. There was something deeply satisfying about helping old Mr. Garrett find the right screws to repair his porch railing, about explaining to teenage Tommy Henderson how to patch a bicycle tire properly. When the bell above the door chimed at 3 o'clock, Roman looked up from the paint display he was organizing to find Zoe standing in the entrance, her hand resting on her prominent belly, staring at him with an expression of complete bewilderment. Roman? What are you doing here? He straightened up, suddenly aware of his dusty jeans and the name tag Bill had insisted he wear. Working. At Chen's Hardware. Bill offered me a job. I accepted. Zoe's gaze moved from his casual clothes to the price tags in his hands to the genuine confusion on her face. You're restocking paint cans. Among other things. Today I learned the difference between interior and exterior primer, helped Mrs. Lopez pick out the right caulk for her bathroom renovation, and discovered that WD-40 is apparently the answer to most of life's problems. Despite herself, Zoe's lips twitched with what might have been amusement. You know WD-40 has over 2,000 documented uses? Bill mentioned that. Also told me you special ordered a book about home repairs for the Jensen family when their teenage son started showing interest in carpentry. You talked to Bill about me? Bill talked to me about you. Apparently, small-town employees discuss the local residents they care about. Roman carefully set down the paint cans and turned to face her fully. He thinks very highly of you. Says you have good instincts for what people need. I came in for light bulbs, Zoe said as if suddenly remembering why she was there. The fixture in my kitchen burned out. What kind of fixture? Fluorescent, incandescent, LED? What wattage? She blinked at him. I don't know. It's just a regular ceiling light. Roman smiled, not the sharp, calculating expression that had made boardroom opponents nervous, but something warm and genuine. That's okay. We can figure it out together. Mind if I walk you home after work to take a look? I promise it's purely professional consultation. You want to come fix my kitchen light. I want to help you with whatever you need help with. Today that happens to be a kitchen light. Tomorrow it might be something else. Zoe studied his face for a long moment, clearly trying to reconcile the man in work clothes offering to fix her appliances with the ruthless CEO who'd once commanded an empire. Okay, she said finally. But just the light. Just the light, Roman agreed. An hour later, Roman found himself standing in Zoe's tiny kitchen, studying the burned-out fluorescent fixture while she sat at her small table, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. When did this stop working? He asked, carefully removing the plastic cover. 3 days ago. I've been using the lamp from my bedroom for cooking, which is not ideal. Especially when you're cooking for 3. Roman glanced at her belly, then back at the fixture. Have you been eating enough? Getting proper nutrition? Dr. Whitman says the babies are growing perfectly. I've been taking prenatal vitamins, eating plenty of protein, all the things I'm supposed to do. Good. That's good. Roman removed the old fluorescent bulb, noting the blackened ends that indicated normal burnout rather than electrical problems. This just needs a new bulb. Simple fix. You know how to change fluorescent bulbs now? Bill taught me this morning. Apparently, it's one of the most common customer requests. Roman carefully installed the new bulb, then replaced the cover. Let's see if this works. He flipped the switch and warm light flooded the kitchen. Zoe's face lit up with genuine pleasure. Thank you. I was dreading trying to call an electrician. I wasn't sure how much that would cost, and with the babies coming, money's tight. Roman tried to keep his voice neutral, but the thought of Zoe struggling financially while he had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes made his chest ache. Not tight exactly. Just different. I'm not used to budgeting on a bookstore assistant's salary. But you're happy here. Happier than you were in New York. It wasn't a question, but Zoe nodded anyway. I am. The work feels meaningful. The people are kind. Life moves at a pace that makes sense. Even with twins coming? Especially with twins coming. Her hand moved to her belly in that protective gesture he was learning to recognize. I want them to grow up somewhere safe, somewhere they can run around and know their neighbors and not have to worry about corporate politics affecting their parents' relationship. The pointed reference to their past wasn't lost on Roman. Zoe, what I said about destroying anything that slows me down? I know what you meant now. I think I knew it then too, but I was scared. Scared of me. Scared of falling so hard for someone that I'd lose myself in their world. She looked up at him, vulnerability replacing caution in her expression. I watched my mother do that with my father. Watched her reshape her entire life around his ambitions until she forgot what her own dreams looked like. And you thought I'd do that to you. I thought you'd try to manage me like another business acquisition. Optimize me for efficiency, eliminate the parts of my life that didn't serve your purposes. Roman set down his tools and sat across from her at the small table. Can I tell you something? Something I realized during those 7 months of looking for you? Okay. I spent 15 years building Kane Industries into something that could survive anything. Market crashes, hostile takeovers, economic downturns. I made it so efficient, so profitable, so self-sustaining that it could practically run itself. He paused, choosing his words carefully. And you know what I discovered when I stopped paying attention to it for 3 months while I searched for you? What? It ran itself just fine. Better, in some ways, because my executives had to step up and make decisions instead of waiting for my approval. The empire I thought needed my constant control was actually being held back by my need to control everything. Zoe was quiet, processing this admission. Losing you taught me that the most important things in life can't be managed or controlled or optimized. They can only be loved. Roman. I'm not asking you to trust me overnight. I'm not asking you to forget 7 months of building a life without me. I'm just asking for the chance to prove that the man you fell for in that elevator was real. That he's still here, just learning to live differently. By working at a hardware store for $15 an hour. By learning to build things instead of just acquiring them. By becoming part of a community instead of standing above it. By proving that I can contribute something meaningful to the life you've built here instead of demanding that you come back to the life I built there. One of the twins kicked hard against her ribs, making Zoe gasp and press her hand to the spot. Roman's eyes immediately went to her belly, concern flickering across his features. Are you okay? Should I call Dr. Whitman? I'm fine. Baby just has strong opinions about evening conversations. Despite herself, Zoe smiled. They've been very active today. Both of them. Can I? Roman gestured toward her belly, hope and longing clear in his expression. Zoe hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Here. This is where Baby A likes to practice karate. Roman's hand settled gently on her belly, and almost immediately their child responded with a firm kick directly against his palm. His face transformed with wonder. Hello, little one, he said softly. I'm sorry I haven't been here. But I'm here now and I'm not going anywhere. A second kick, this one from Baby B, made both parents gasp. I think they know your voice, Zoe whispered. Do you think, would it be okay if I talk to them sometimes? Not necessarily here, but maybe we could arrange times when I could just be with you while you're carrying them? The request was so gentle, so careful, that Zoe felt her remaining walls begin to crack. You want to be involved in the pregnancy. I want to be involved in everything. Every doctor's appointment, every midnight craving, every time they kick you awake at 3 a.m. I want to be the one who builds their cribs and paints their nursery and reads them stories before they're even born. And when they're here, when they're crying and messy and demanding and they turn our lives completely upside down. Roman's smile was soft, certain. Especially then. They sat like that as darkness fell outside, Roman's hand on her belly where their children grew, both of them beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't trust renewed or love restored. But it was a foundation, something solid they could build on, brick by careful brick, conversation by honest conversation. I should go, Roman said finally, though he made no move to remove his hand from her belly. You need rest and I have an early shift tomorrow. What are you doing tomorrow? Bill's teaching me how to cut glass for window repairs. Says it's a delicate process that requires patience and steady hands. Sounds like good practice. For what? Zoe's smile was small but genuine. For everything you're going to need to learn about being a father. As Roman walked back to his apartment across town, his hand still carrying the phantom sensation of his children moving beneath his touch, he realized something had fundamentally shifted. Not just in his circumstances, but in his understanding of what success actually meant. Tomorrow he'd cut glass and help customers and earn $15 an hour. Tomorrow he'd continue proving that Roman Kane could be more than a corporate predator in an expensive suit. And maybe, if he was very lucky and very patient, tomorrow would bring him one step closer to deserving the woman and children who had become his entire world. Some transformations happen overnight. Others take time, patience, and the willingness to start completely over. Roman Kane was discovering he had more patience than he'd ever imagined. Thank you so much for watching this incredible journey of love, fear, and redemption. If Roman and Zoe's story touched your heart, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you thought about their ending. Don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives and ring that notification bell so you never miss another epic love story that will make you believe in the power of true love.